The transport ship descended through thick clouds of orange mist as Cale Mercer pressed his face against the small window. Watching the jungle moon of Sarek 7 grow larger with each passing second, he had traveled for 3 weeks to reach this place. Crossing dozens of star systems and enduring the stares of aliens who had never seen a human up close before, the Valkyrath Hunter Academy waited below. Hidden somewhere in that endless sea of dark green trees and twisting vines, Cale was 24 years old, average height. With short brown hair and calm gray eyes that revealed nothing of his thoughts, he wore the simple gray uniform of an academy trainee. And he carried only a small bag with his personal belongings. Nothing about him seemed special or remarkable. Nothing about him suggested he belonged here. The transport landed with a gentle thud, and the doors slid open to reveal a platform of black stone surrounded by towering structures. Made of metal and glass. 40 other trainees already stood in formation, and every single one of them turned to look at the human who stepped off the ship. Cale felt their eyes on him as he walked forward to join the group. A Varrock heavy wielder stood nearest to him. A massive creature with gray skin like cracked rock and arms as thick as tree trunks. The Varrock looked down at Cale and let out a low rumbling sound that might have been laughter. Behind the Varrock stood 3 Cathar insectoids, their bodies covered in gleaming black armor that was part of their own flesh. Their compound eyes tracked Cale's movements with cold precision. Further back, a group of Nelvani telepaths whispered to each other without moving their lips. Their pale blue skin shimmering in the sunlight. Cale took his place at the end of the formation and said nothing. He simply waited. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed across the platform, and the trainees immediately fell silent. Commander Thyra Velkonis approached from the main building, and Cale understood at once why the others showed such fear. She stood 7 feet tall, her body covered in scales that shifted between deep purple and silver as she moved. 4 powerful arms hung at her sides, each one ending in clawed fingers that looked capable of tearing through metal. Her eyes were golden with vertical pupils, and they swept across the assembled trainees like a predator examining potential prey. Thyra had trained hunters at this academy for 200 years. She had fought in wars that happened before humanity had even learned to build fires. She had killed creatures that existed only in nightmares, and she had never once failed to break a trainee who did not belong in her program. She stopped in front of the formation and clasped 2 of her hands behind her back while the other 2 rested on the weapons at her belt. "Welcome to the Predator program," she said, her voice deep and cold like stones grinding together. "You have been chosen from thousands of candidates across the Galactic Concordat because someone believed you had potential." Her golden eyes found Cale in the back row. "Some of you," she continued, "are here because of politics rather than skill." She walked toward him, and the other trainees parted to let her pass. Cale did not move or look away as she stopped directly in front of him, towering over his smaller frame. "The humans send us this?" Thyra asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A creature whose ancestors were still throwing rocks when my grandmother commanded fleets." Laughter rippled through the formation. The Vork's rumbling grew louder, and even the emotionless Cathari made clicking sounds of amusement. Thyra leaned down until her face was inches from Cale's. "Your species has been part of the Concordat for 12 years, she said. 12 years is nothing. It is less than nothing. It is the blink of an eye in the history of the galaxy." Cale met her gaze without flinching. "I understand, Commander," he said quietly. Thyra straightened and looked at him with something between disgust and curiosity. "You understand nothing, human. You are soft, weak, and short-lived. Your kind has no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, no telepathy. You are perhaps the most defenseless sentient species ever discovered." She turned and walked back toward the front of the formation. "But the Concordat Council has ordered me to give you a chance." so I will follow orders as I always have." She gestured to one of her assistants, who stepped forward with a datapad. "Trainee Mercer will be assigned to Squad Omega." A murmur went through the crowd, and Kale noticed that several aliens were now looking at him with what appeared to be pity. He did not need to ask what Squad Omega meant. The name alone told him everything. It was where the Academy sent trainees they expected to fail. "You have 1 hour to settle into your quarters," Thyra announced to the group. "Training begins at dawn. I suggest you rest while you can." The formation broke apart, and trainees began moving toward the residential buildings in small groups. Kale walked alone. His quarters in the Omega section were small and bare, with only a bed, a desk, and a storage unit for his belongings. The walls were gray metal, and the single window looked out over the endless jungle that surrounded the Academy. He sat on the edge of the bed and allowed himself a moment to feel the weight of what had just happened. Thyra's words had not surprised him. He had expected mockery and doubt from the moment he applied to the program. Humans were new to the galaxy, and new species were never respected until they proved themselves worthy of respect. That was simply how things worked. Kale reached into his bag and pulled out a small data tablet, activated it, and began searching through the Academy's historical records, which were available to all trainees. He read about past trials and famous graduates. He studied the tactics of the Phantom instructors, the elite hunters who tested every trainee. He examined combat footage and survival statistics and environmental reports. Hours passed, and the sky outside his window turned from orange to deep red as the sun set behind the jungle canopy. Kale kept reading, found records of previous trainees who had been assigned to Squad Omega, and he noted that not a single one had ever graduated from the program. He found detailed information about Commander Thyra Velkonis, her 200 years of service, her undefeated record in live combat, her absolute certainty that no trainee could ever surprise her. Kale smiled for the first time since arriving on Sarek 7. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it carried the weight of something ancient and patient within. If Thyra had made a mistake today, she had told him exactly what she believed about humans. She had revealed her assumptions and her blind spot. She had given him the most valuable gift a hunter could receive. She had underestimated her prey. Kale turned off the tablet and lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, the trials would begin. Tomorrow, he would show them what a human could do, but tonight, he would rest and let them believe he was nothing special. That was exactly what he wanted them to think. The Blackwood simulation zone stretched across 200 square kilometers of the most dangerous terrain on Sarek 7. Massive trees with trunks as wide as buildings rose toward canopy so thick that sunlight barely reached the ground below. Poisonous plants with bright colors grew everywhere, and the sounds of unseen creatures echoed through the darkness. Kale stood at the edge of the zone with the other 39 trainees, listening to Commander Thyra explain the first trial, "Hunt or be hunted," she said, her golden eyes gleaming with anticipation. "You will survive in the Blackwood for 72 hours while our Phantom instructors track you down." She gestured to the shadows behind her, and 6 figures emerged from the darkness. They wore black armor that seemed to absorb light, and their faces were hidden behind masks that showed no expression. These were the Phantoms, elite hunters who had completed hundreds of successful missions across the galaxy. The Phantoms have never failed to capture every trainee. Thyra continued, "Not once in 150 years of this trial. Your goal is not to defeat them. Your goal is simply to survive as long as possible." She turned and looked directly at Kale. "Some of you will not last an hour." The trainees were given basic supplies: a thermal cloak for warmth, a water purifier, emergency rations for 3 days, and a single signal flare to use if they wished to surrender. No weapons were allowed. The horn sounded, and the trainees scattered into the jungle. Kale watched the others disappear into the undergrowth before he moved. The Vorok heavy worlders charged forward with confidence, their massive bodies crashing through the vegetation. The Cathari insectoids climbed the trees with their 6 limbs, seeking high ground where they could use their natural armor as defense. The Nelvani telepaths moved in pairs, using their psychic abilities to sense approaching threats. Everyone had a plan based on their natural advantages. Kale had no natural advantages. He was slower than most species, weaker than many, and his senses were average at best. But he had something else, something that did not show on any physical evaluation. He had patience. Kale moved into the jungle at a steady pace, not running, not hiding, just walking and observing. He studied the terrain and memorized landmarks and noted the direction of the wind. He found a river basin after 2 hours and followed it upstream until he discovered a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. This would be his base, at least for now. First screams came 6 hours into the trial in Nelvani. Trainee had been caught by 2 phantoms who had tracked his psychic signature through the forest. The sound of his capture echoed through the trees, and somewhere in the darkness, Kale heard the clicking laughter of Cathari trainees who thought they were safe. They were wrong. By hour 12, 15 trainees had been captured. The phantoms moved through the blackwood like ghosts, appearing from nowhere and disappearing just as quickly. Their coordination was perfect, and their knowledge of the terrain was absolute. Commander Thyra had joined the hunt personally. She wanted to be the one who caught the human, the one who proved that his species did not belong in her academy. She tracked his heat signature to the river basin and found the cave behind the waterfall. Her 4 arms tensed with anticipation as she pushed through the falling water and entered the darkness. The cave was empty. Floating in a shallow pool near the entrance was Kale's thermal cloak, still warm from his body heat. A decoy. Thyra stood in the empty cave and felt something she had not experienced in decades. Surprise. The human had anticipated her. He had known she would track his heat signature. He had prepared for it. She emerged from the waterfall and scanned the surrounding jungle with new eyes. Clever little creature, she muttered to herself. But cleverness will only delay the inevitable. Hours passed, and more trainees fell to the phantoms. The Vorok heavy worlders were captured when they tried to fight back, their strength useless against opponents who refused to engage in direct combat. The Cathari were found in their tree nests and dragged down one by one. Even the Nelvani telepaths could not escape hunters who had learned to shield their thoughts. By hour 48, only 6 trainees remained uncaptured. Kale was one of them. Had not stayed in one place for more than 2 hours since leaving the cave. He moved constantly, always walking, never running, conserving his energy while the phantoms exhausted themselves searching for him. He watched them from hidden positions, counting their numbers and timing their patrols and learning their communication patterns. He discovered that they checked in with each other every 30 minutes. Noticed that they always approached from downwind to avoid detection. He observed that they relied heavily on technology and rarely trusted their natural senses. Every piece of information went into his memory, building a picture of his hunters that grew clearer with each passing hour. On the morning of the 3rd day, Thyra found something that made her stop in her tracks. It was a small marker carved into the bark of a tree, placed at eye level where she would be certain to see it. The marker showed a series of lines, like a tally count. 6 lines for 6 phantoms. The human was not just hiding from them, he was counting them. Thyra touched the carved lines with one clawed finger and felt a chill run down her spine. Despite the jungle heating 200 years, no trainee had ever done anything like this. They all ran and hid and hoped to survive. None of them had ever treated the phantoms as something to be studied. None of them had ever looked at the hunters and seen prey. She activated her communicator and spoke. To the other phantoms, new orders, she said. A voice tight with an emotion she refused to name. The human is priority 1. I want him found and captured within 12 hours. Understood, Commander, came the reply. But we have lost his trail. He moves constantly and leaves almost no trace. Thyra closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then we will make him come to us, she said. Converge on Sector 7. We will set a trap and wait for him to walk into it. She looked at the tally marks one more time before moving on. Somewhere in this jungle, a human was watching her somewhere in the darkness. Prey had decided to become something else entirely. Thyra did not know what that something was, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was genuinely curious to find out. The Thornvale was the most dangerous sector of the Blackwood, a place where even the phantom instructors moved with caution. The trees here grew so close together that sunlight never touched the ground, and the air was thick with spores that could cause hallucinations if breathed in. Two deeply poisonous vines hung from every branch, and the creatures that lived in the darkness had evolved to be silent and deadly. Thyra led 3 phantoms into the Thornvale on the morning of the 3rd day, determined to end the hunt for the human once and for all. He has to be in here, she said, scanning the shadows with her golden eyes. This is the only sector we have not fully searched. Vox, a veteran Cathari phantom with 20 years of experience, clicked his mandibles in agreement. The terrain favors someone who wants to hide, he said, but it also limits his escape routes. If we spread out and push from the north, we can drive him toward the cliffs. Thyra nodded and gave the order. The 4 hunters separated, each taking a different path through the twisted forest. They would meet again at the southern edge of the Thornvale, and somewhere along the way, they would find their prey. What Thyra did not understand was that Cale had been watching them for hours. He had seen them enter the sector from his position high in the canopy, hidden among leaves so dark they seemed to swallow light itself. He had counted them and noted their formation and predicted their likely paths based on the terrain, and he had made a decision. He was done hiding for millions of years. Humans had survived on a planet that wanted to kill them. They had no claws to fight predators, no armor to protect them, no venom to defend themselves. But they had developed something far more dangerous than any natural weapon. They had developed the ability to run not fast, like a cheetah or a wolf, but far. Humans could run longer and farther than almost any creature in the galaxy. They could walk and jog and walk again for hours, without stopping, covering distances that would exhaust species twice their size. This was called persistence hunting, and it had made humans the most successful predators on their home world. Cale began to move. He did not run away from the phantoms. He ran around them, staying just far enough ahead that they could sense his presence, but never catch him. He left small traces for them to follow. A broken branch here, a footprint there, just enough to keep them interested, and then he simply kept moving, hour after hour. Cale maintained a steady pace through the Thornvale, walked when they slowed down and jogged when they sped up, always staying at the edge of their perception. The phantoms were faster than him in short bursts, stronger in every way that could be measured, but they were not built for this kind of hunt. Vox was the first to realize something was wrong. He had been tracking the human for 6 hours, and his legs were beginning to ache in ways they never had before. Aetheri were built for ambush hunting, for waiting in silence and then striking with explosive speed. They were not built to chase prey across kilometers of difficult terrain. Commander, he said through his communicator, I need to rest. My stamina is depleted. Rest later, Thyra replied. We are close. I can feel it. Vox pushed forward, but his movements were slower now, less precise. He lost sight of the trail and stopped to search for new signs. That was when the wire caught his leg. He fell forward and hit the ground hard. And before he could recover, more wires wrapped around his arms and chest. They were made from vines that grew in the thornvale. Twisted together and anchored to the trees, Vox struggled against the bonds. But every movement only made them tighter. A shadow dropped from the canopy above him. Kale landed silently and knelt beside the trapped phantom, holding a finger to his lips in a gesture that needed no translation. "Your communicator," Kale said quietly. "Remove it slowly." Vox hesitated, his compound eyes trying to read the human's expression. He saw no anger there, no hatred, just calm focus and absolute patience. He removed his communicator and placed it on the ground. Kale picked it up and attached a small piece of paper to Vox's chest armor, using more of the twisted vine. Then he disappeared back into the vague shadows without another word. 20 minutes later, Thyra found Vox still bound to the tree. She cut him free with her claws and read the note pinned to his armor. 5 words in simple Galactic Standard. "You stopped looking up." Thyra felt her scale shift from purple to a darker shade, a sign of stress that she had not shown in over a century. She activated her communicator. "All phantoms, report to my position immediately. We regroup now." The 5 remaining phantoms gathered around her within the hour. They were all showing signs of fatigue, their movements slower and their breathing heavier than normal. Even Thyra, with her 200 years of combat experience, felt the strain of the extended chase. "He is not running from us," she said, looking at each of her hunters in turn. "He is leading us. He has been leading us since the trial began." One of the phantoms, a young Nelvani named Sethis, frowned in confusion. "Leading us where, Commander?" Before Thyra could answer, a sound echoed through the thornvale. It was a crash, followed by a cry of pain. Phantom Rex, a Vorak heavy worlder who had positioned himself at the rear of the group, had triggered a deadfall trap. Heavy logs had fallen from above and pinned him to the ground. Was alive but unable to move. Thyra rushed to help him, her forearms straining to lift the weight as she worked. She realized the terrible truth. The human had herded them, like animals being driven toward a slaughterhouse. He had used their own hunting instincts against them, letting them think they were closing in while actually guiding them into terrain that favored ambush over numbers. She finally freed Rex and helped him stand. Then she activated her communicator and sent a message to Academy Command. Her voice was steady, controlled, but her 4 hands were trembling in a way they had never trembled before. "Command, this is Valkonis," she said. "The human is not hiding anymore." She paused and looked into the darkness of the thornvale, where somewhere a creature with no claws and no armor was waiting for his next opportunity. "He is hunting us." Dawn was coming to the Blackwood, painting the sky in shades of red and gold above the endless canopy. Thyra stood in the ancient ruins at the heart of the jungle, surrounded by crumbling walls that had been built by a civilization dead for 10,000 years. Only 3 phantom instructors remained at her side. In the 200 years she had commanded this trial, she had never lost more than 1 instructor. Now 4 of her elite hunters had been captured or disabled by a single trainee, a human who had been in the galaxy for barely more than a decade. Academy observers were watching through drones that floated silently above the Mehras treetops. Thyra could feel their eyes on her, recording every moment of what was becoming the most unusual trial in the history of the Predator program. "Commander," said Phantom Dallas, a scarred Vorak who had served with Thyra for 30 years. "Perhaps we should fall back to the Academy perimeter. We can establish a defensive position and wait for him to make a mistake." The other 2 phantoms nodded in agreement. They were tired and confused and operating in territory that no longer felt familiar. The ruins should have been a trap for the human, a place with limited exits where superior numbers would guarantee victory. Instead, it felt like they were the ones being cornered. Thyra opened her mouth to refuse, to insist that they press forward and end this hunt on her terms. But before she could speak, a voice echoed through the ruins. It came from Vox's communicator, the one that Kale had taken when he captured the Cathari Phantom, Commander Volconus. The voice was calm and quiet, without any trace of fear or exhaustion. Your instructors are skilled, Kale continued, but you train them for prey that runs. You never train them for something that chooses when to be caught. Thyra grabbed the communicator from Dallas and spoke into it. You cannot hide forever, human. Eventually you will make a mistake, and I will be there when you do. A soft laugh came through the speaker. I stopped hiding 16 hours ago, Commander. You just did not notice. The communication ended, and silence fell over the ruins. Thyra looked at her remaining phantoms and saw something in their eyes that she had never seen before. Doubt. We withdraw to the eastern wall, Dallas said firmly. We hold that position until the trial ends. There is no shame in defending rather than attacking. The other phantoms began to move toward the eastern section of the ruins. Thyra did not follow. Commander? Dallas asked, stopping to look back at her. Go, Thyra said, her voice hard. Establish your position. I will end this myself. That is not wise. I gave you an order, Phantom. Dallas hesitated for a moment, then nodded and continued toward the eastern wall with the others. Thyra stood alone in the center of the ruins, her forearms hanging at her sides, her golden eyes scanning every shadow and every pile of broken stone. She knew he was close. She could feel it in the way the air seemed to thicken around her. In the unnatural silence that had fallen over the jungle, "Come out, human," she called. "No more games. Face me directly and let us finish this." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a figure stepped out from behind a crumbling pillar. 20 meters away, Kale looked terrible. His uniform was torn and covered in dirt, and scratches marked his arms and face from 3 days of moving through the hostile jungle. He walked with a slight limp, and dark circles under his eyes showed his exhaustion, but he was smiling. It was not a triumphant smile or mocking one. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Thyra charged. She crossed the distance between them in seconds, her forearms reaching for the human with claws extended. She was faster than him, stronger than him, armed with natural weapons that could tear through metal. The fight should have lasted moments. Lasted 11 minutes. Thyra struck him again and again, her claws leaving marks on his arms and chest. As he tried to block her attack, she threw him into walls and knocked him to the ground and delivered blows that would have killed members of most species each time. Kale got back up each time. He watched her movements more carefully, adjusted his positioning, and learned something new about how she fought. Thyra began to feel the first hints of fatigue. Around minute 4, her arms were growing heavier, and her strikes were losing their precision. To chase through the thorn veil had already drained her reserves, and now she was burning through what little energy remained. Kale was also fading, but he faded slower. His species had evolved on a world where survival meant outlasting predators rather than defeating them. Humans did not need to win quickly. They just needed to not lose until their opponent could no longer continue. Minute 7, and Thyra's breathing had become ragged. Minute 9, and she missed a strike that should have been easy. Minute 11, and she saw her chance. Kale stumbled over a piece of broken stone, and his guard dropped for just a moment. Thyra lunged forward with all 4 arms, putting every last bit of her strength into a blow that would end the fight forever. But Kale had not stumbled by accident. He had been watching her patterns for 11 minutes, learning which attacks she favored when she thought her opponent was vulnerable. He caught her primary arm as it came toward him and twisted his body, using her own momentum to pull her off balance. One leg swept behind hers, and suddenly the 7-foot Serethi commander was falling. She hit the ground hard, and before she could recover, Kale was on top of her, his forearm pressed against her throat, not crushing, not hurting. Just present the reminder that he could end this whenever he chose. Thyra looked up into his gray eyes and searched for rage, for hatred, for the desire to hurt that she had seen in thousands of warriors across hundreds of worlds. She found none of those things. She found only patience. The patience of a species that had once chased prey across entire continents, following footprints for days until the animals simply could not run anymore. The patience of creatures who had survived not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by being the ones who never, ever stopped. "What are you?" Thyra whispered. Her voice barely audible. Kale held her gaze for a long moment before answering. "We are what happens when a species has no claws, no armor, no venom," he said quietly. "We are what happens when the universe tries to kill something, and it refuses to die." Above them, the sun finally broke through the canopy, casting golden light across the ancient ruins. The trial was over, and everything had changed. 3 months had passed since the trial in the Blackwood, but the galaxy had not stopped talking about what happened there. Footage of a single human trainee systematically capturing elite phantom instructors had been classified by the Academy Council within hours of the trials, and it stayed classified for exactly 6 days before someone leaked it to the Galactic Network. Within a week, billions of beings across 1,000 worlds had watched the recordings. They saw a creature with no natural weapons evade hunters who had never failed before. They saw patience turn into strategy and strategy turn into victory. They saw something that many species had never believed possible. A human winning against impossible odds through nothing but determination and intelligence. The Volcarith Hunter Academy's graduation ceremony took place in the central arena, a massive circular space surrounded by stands that could hold 10,000 spectators today. Every seat was filled. Kale stood with the other graduates near the front of the arena. Wearing the formal black uniform of a certified hunter. Beside him stood Dallas, the Vorak Phantom who had suggested retreat in the ruins, and Cephis, the young Nelvani telepath who had witnessed the final confrontation through the Academy's surveillance drones. They had both requested to be present when Kale received his certification across the galaxy. Millions more watched through live broadcast as Academy officials called each graduate forward to receive their credentials. When Kale's name was announced, the arena fell silent. He walked to the center of the floor and stood before the High Council, a group of 7 ancient beings who governed the Academy's operations. The eldest among them, a creature so old that no one remembered what species he had once been, spoke in a voice like rustling leaves. "Kale Mercer of Earth," he said, "you have completed the Predator program with a performance that will be studied for centuries to come. Do you accept the responsibilities of a certified hunter of the Galactic Concordat?" "I do," Kale replied. The elder nodded and handed Kale a small silver badge shaped like a crescent moon. "Then go forth and bring honor to your species." Applause erupted from the stands, but Kale barely heard it. His eyes had found Commander Thera Velkonis in the crowd. She sat in a private box reserved for senior instructors, watching him with an expression he could not read. After the ceremony, Kale was surrounded by other graduates who wanted to shake his hand and ask questions about his tactics in the Blackwood. He answered as politely as he could while slowly making his way toward the exit. A familiar figure blocked his path. Thara stood before him, her forearms crossed over her chest and her golden eyes studying him with an intensity that made several nearby aliens step back nervously. "Walk with me," she said. It was not a request. They left the arena together and moved through quiet corridors until they reached a small observation deck overlooking the jungle moon's endless forests. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I have trained 10,000 hunters," Thyra finally said, her voice quieter than Kale had ever heard it. I have fought in wars you have no names for. I have killed creatures that exist only in nightmares. I have never misjudged prey so completely. She turned to face him directly. What are you? Kale thought about the question for a moment before answering. We are what happens when a species has no advantages and survives anyway, he said. We learn to be afraid, Commander. Every shadow could hold a predator, and every strange sound could mean death. For millions of years, we lived with that fear. We looked out at the jungle below them, thinking of another jungle on a world very far away. But somewhere along the way, we learned to make that fear into something else. We learned to turn it into focus, into patience, into the ability to keep going when every part of us screamed to stop. Thera was silent for a long time when she spoke again. Her voice carried something Kale had never expected to hear from her: respect. I have submitted a recommendation to the Academy Council, she said. I believe you should be advanced immediately to instructor candidate. Kale blinked in surprise. Commander, I am not sure. You defeated me, Thyra interrupted. You did not beat me with strength or speed or natural weapons. You beat me with something I have never seen in 200 years of training hunters. She performed a gesture with all 4 of her arms, bringing them together in front of her chest in a complex pattern that Kale did not recognize. This is the Serathi symbol of respect between equals, she explained. I have not offered it to another species in more than a century. You have earned it. Kale returned the gesture as best he could with only 2 arms. They stood together on the observation deck as the sun began to set over Sarek 7, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple far away, in a region of space that the Galactic Concordat had long considered hostile. A transmission was being received by beings who had spent decades preparing for war against the civilized worlds. The transmission contained footage from the Blackwood trial, along with detailed analysis of human capabilities that the Concordat's enemies had long dismissed as irrelevant. A council of warlords gathered to review the information. They watched the recordings in silence, their various faces showing confusion and then concern and then something that looked very much like fear when the footage ended. The eldest warlord spoke. Previous assessments of human combat potential were based on their limited technology and small population, she said. We believed they would be easy targets once our invasion began. She looked around the table at her fellow commanders. Recommend immediate revision of all engagement protocols regarding human forces. Previous assessments were insufficient. The other warlords nodded in agreement, and the meeting was adjourned. None of them noticed the small human ship that had been monitoring their communications from just outside sensor range aboard that ship. An intelligence officer smiled and began encrypting a message to send back to Earth. The message was simple. They are finally starting to understand on Sarek 7. Kale Mercer stood beside Commander Thyra Volconis and watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. He did not know about the warlords or their revised assessments. Did not know that his actions in the Blackwood had already begun to change how the entire galaxy viewed humanity. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: humans had spent millions of years being afraid of the dark. Now the dark was beginning to be afraid of them, and that was exactly as it should be.